Hello and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez. Thank you so much for listening on the radio right now. If you would like to watch today's episode, let me lead you over to Facebook and YouTube. That is where we are streaming live. Check it out, the Pastor's Perspective YouTube channel or Facebook page. You can watch us there, but I don't know why you want to watch us. It's not like we use animation or graphics or anything like that. It's just three guys, three talking heads.
Bobby is pretty good looking.
Well, that's true. That's true. And he can be very animated.
I think they could just black you and me out. Just have Bobby.
Yes, the whole time. I like it. Great idea. But if you have a question for us, give us a call, 888-564-6173. Bobby Conway is one of the pastors answering your questions today. He's from Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's also got a YouTube channel called Christianity Still Makes Sense. And here in the studio with me, sitting in for Brian Broderson, is John Huang, the senior pastor at Christ Point City Church in Huntington Beach. California. So give us a call.
Guys.
How you doing, man?
Yo, it's great to be here with all of you.
Doing all right. How you doing?
Yes. All right. Give us a call if you got a question at 888-564-6173. Now, you can send us your questions on Facebook Messenger or on Instagram, but the best way to get an answer is to call us when we're here live, like right now, till 4 p.m. Pacific time, 888-564-6173. So, let's go to Facebook for one of our questions, our first one of the day. It's from Monica, and she writes, "My coworker and my son's grandmother had questions for me, but I don't know how to interpret dreams or have answers to explain what they see. So the first situation, my boss asked me, 'What does it mean when you see Jesus in your dream?' She explained that she was in a place of peace. She saw rainbows, green trees, butterflies, and when she turned to look around, she saw a man with white crystal hair and a beard holding a stick. She believed this was Jesus. She has been praying and going through some stuff, but she said that it was the most beautiful place she'd ever been. She didn't want to come back." Meanwhile, my son's grandmother has been worried about her son, who is hospitalized and almost lost his leg. She told me that she had prayed and cried that God please not take her son. 2 days ago, she turned on her TV. It was all blue. So she turned it off and on again. This time, when she turned it back on, 2 angels appeared on the screen. Looking up, she wanted to know what it meant. They know how deep I am in my faith. They see the relationship I have with God. But I wish I knew how to interpret. That just isn't my gift. Could you help with these 2 things? John, what would you say? Do you interpret dreams, Tom? John?
No, I don't.
Oh,
so
never mind. Bobby, we'll go to you. No,
I would be the wrong person to ask on that one. But, it is interesting when you read the book of Genesis, and there's that story where there was a Pharaoh in Egypt who had a dream. And, reading the narrative of that story, we find out that it was prophetic about the years of plenty and the years of famine. And when Joseph was brought to interpret those dreams, Joseph said something I think that we need to really hold on to. And Joseph recognized, saying, listen, I'm not the one who can interpret dreams. God is the one who can do that. And so it seems that in the interpreting of dreams, there's almost an element of a prophetic gift to be able to do that. And that is, speaking about dreams that are really from the Lord. And I think that this is where it gets a bit challenging, because there are dreams that we have that it's just really brain science. It's more of just, memories that are clashing into each other, and a storyline is being shaped, and we keep moving from scenario to scenario, and it may keep us entertained for the night, but it doesn't go any further than that. And most of our dreams, when we wake up, we don't even remember them. But there are, I don't dismiss the fact that there could be dreams that are prophetic, where that after you wake up and they just linger a bit, and it causes you to ponder and to pray. And in those cases, I think that it's not something that we try to rush interpretations. If it really is from the Lord, if God is speaking, then I think that it's safe to assume that God has a way of also bringing the right person into your life to make sense of those dreams that are really from the Lord that you're having. And just even when you think about the vision of Peter, there in Acts chapter 10, and it says that after he had this vision, it was while he was pondering that there was a knock on the door. And when they opened the door, it were these Romans that was sent by Cornelius. And it was at that moment that Peter understood, hey, the Spirit of God wants me to go with these guys. And then when they finally got to the house of Cornelius, and the Cornelius explained to Peter how God had sent an angel to direct him to call for Peter, that was when Peter recognized, okay, this was from the Lord, and God has a message for you, and this is the message. And I think that we need to be careful where we don't sensationalize experiences. We don't try to interpret out of just mere subjective feelings, because I think that there could also be harm where people assume they have a gift for interpreting dreams, and then they start making these interpretations for people and come to find out that it actually does more harm than good because it really wasn't from the Lord. And I think that's a serious business when someone says, "Thus says the Lord." And so I think that if a person has something that they're just a bit perplexed by, keep pondering it like Peter did, pray about it, and if there's a message that God wants you to hear or to know, if He's the provider of the dreams, and God is also the one who's able to send with clarity and with biblical clarity and with discernment the right interpretation for it.
Monica, thank you for sending in your question on Facebook Messenger. And here's another one that we got the same way. It's from Kathy and Paul. They want to know, how should praying against things fit into our prayer life? So things like, when people have been taught to pray in certain ways, I come against you, Satan. I come against the spirit of fear, the spirit of bitterness, and all these other things. So how much of our prayer life should we be devoting to praying against things? Bobby, what would you say to Kathy and Paul?
Well, first off, when we think about praying against things, we need to define our terms, because things that are out there like trees and dogs and cars, we don't need to pray against things of that nature that aren't operating in the moral realm. So when we talk about praying against, bitterness, it's not like bitterness is just floating out in some part of the sky and we're praying for the force of bitterness to not enclose in on us. So I think we've got a couple things. Number one, we're talking about how do we deal with spiritual warfare when the enemy is coming at us. And we know, according to the scriptures, that we read in Jude, the Lord rebuke you. So that is kind of what we do. We look to the Lord and we ask the Lord to protect us. We don't look to getting in conversations or interactions or targeting, our threats or challenges to Satan or his minions. So that's one level. We take that to the Lord. The other level is then, what do we do with things like bitterness inside of us, right? That's a part of our which is a part of our fallen nature, our unrighteous anger, gossip, lust. What do we do with that kind of stuff? Well, I think that let's say yesterday, or let's say today, somebody had a bad day with anger, and you've been struggling with anger, and you're wondering, what can I do with that? I would say you could go home and you could just type in Google search Bible verses about anger. And you could just draw a circle on a clean sheet of paper. And I do this all the time for my practice of sanctification. Here's what I do to deal with my character defects, for example, to pray against them, to keep them at bay. Identify the different areas in your life that get you in trouble. Is it lust, addiction, gossip, anger? What are kind of those core areas that creep up on you? And then let's say anger is one of those, and today it's been on you. Well, then what I tend to do is I'll look up verses on that particular issue that I'm struggling with. If it's, being anxious, for example. And so you look up Bible verses on anxiety or on anger, and then just take 10, 15, 20 verses, look at them. And so you have the word anger in the center of a page. And then what I do from that is I start clustering about what does the Bible say? Well, be angry and do not sin. Anger can get you in a lot of trouble. A person that doesn't control his anger lacks self-control. So I start writing those things down because I'm trying to get my feel for what God says about this thing that I'm struggling with. And then I ask God to meet me in that, to help me. But then I also do a next step and I create another cluster. And I ask this question. So the first question is, what does the Bible say about this particular issue? The second question is, how has this particular issue got me in trouble throughout my life? And so I think about how this has bothered me. And so anxiety. And I also have went back and I try to think, when do I first remember being anxious? What was that like in my life? And then I just try to think about the process of anxiety and how it's grown in my life and how it's impacted others in my life. And I just start writing things down. So if it's anxiety, for someone like me, I would be putting things like, what does it do? It causes me to struggle being present. It makes me worry about things that I shouldn't. It causes me to struggle trusting God with the future. And I start doing that. By the way, this will build out a great amount of wisdom for you in life as it relates to this. So then that's the second step, right? Well, the first step is identify your issue, the emotion or thought that bothers you. So what emotion or thought really troubles me? Number 2, what does the Bible say about this emotion or thought? Number 3, how has this emotion or thought impacted my life? Number 4, what does the Lord want to do with my life as it relates to this, and what does he want me to do as far as surrendering to him? And then that becomes prayer material for me. And then I go back and review these things. And that's kind of what my spiritual sanctification process is like, to keep these things away from me.
Good stuff. Kathy and Paul, thank you for sending in your question on Facebook Messenger. And Lee, I'm going to go to you next, but first let me do one more that we have here. The number to call, by the way, is 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173. Bobby Conway and John Huang answering your questions until 4 p.m. Pacific time on this Wednesday, the 8th of November. So this question here, how do you spread the gospel through things that God has gifted you with? What would you say, John?
Well, I think the most practical way is to serve others with those spiritual gifts. When you read Romans chapter 12, 1 Corinthians 12 through 14, and 1 Peter chapter 4, in every one of those cases, the Bible talks about using your spiritual gifts. Don't just let them remain dormant, but rather recognize those gifts and those talents that God has given you, and look for opportunities, look for ways that you can exercise those gifts in meeting the needs of people around you. And I'll tell you, there's something so beautiful when you practically come to people that are in need of help, and whether it's an encouraging word or whether they need practical help, like they're moving, or maybe it's someone that is poor that needs supplies, and you come and you bring those kinds of aid to them. I found that people are generally more open to listen to what you believe and the things that you want to share than those who merely just come at it from merely talk. And so spiritual gifts, what they do is they communicate the heart and the action of God in very visible, tangible ways to people that are in need. And I think that that's a great way to practice your spiritual gifts. And then when God opens up those opportunities for you to share with others the reason why you're benefiting them with those gifts, then that gives you an opportunity to bring in the gospel.
Good stuff. John, thank you. Good stuff. Good answer. All right, 888-564-6173, 888-564-6173. And let's begin our time on the phones on this Wednesday afternoon with Lee, listening in Poway, California on KSDW, San Diego's home for worship and the word. Hey there, Lee. Welcome to the program.
Yes, hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, how can we help you?
Well, my question was, in Scripture it says to cast your troubles upon God through prayer. And if you cast your troubles upon God, then do you continue to pray about the same thing? It seems like if you've cast your troubles on Him, then it should be over, but you basically continue to pray, and the same thing seems to bother.
Okay. Bobby, do we just cast our cares upon the Lord once, or how does that work?
I wish it was that easy, Lee. Unfortunately, I think it takes a lot of pressing into the Lord as it relates to some of these struggles. So I would say, depending upon the nature of the care that we're casting upon Him, it will require greater sense of dependency. And so I would also say that if we're casting the same thing on Him every day for 20 years, then we need to think about what's broken in my growth process with the Lord. I like to think of my spiritual life as a garden, and having a metaphor can sometimes help us with spiritual growth. And so picture a garden, and a garden that's not cared for, it's not tended to, it just dies out, gets brown, there's death, the ground gets hard. But Jesus is our gardener, so to speak. You know, He's the one that He says, if we abide in Him, we'll bear much fruit. And so tilling the soil of the ground has to happen. And then there's, putting the seed in, and then fertilizing, and then watering. And so there's this preparatory work where a lot of times we feel spiritually stuck. We're casting cares on Him, but it might just be that we're doing a lot of tilling work in our garden. There's a new trial that comes our way, and God's wanting us to reach out and depend upon Him. And so, we're doing that tilling work and the seeding and the fertilizing. But what happens is sometimes Christians only go back to the garden, so to speak, their garden, and give attention to it when they're really in need. And what we really have to figure out is, how do we cultivate the garden every day? And so there's year-round work in our yards, right? You till the ground, you fertilize, you seed, you water it, you prune, and then you see fruit eventually, and then you take the fruit off. And I think that there's certain qualities when we identify these cares in our life, these struggles in our life, these character defects even. What we'll find is, hey, some of the trees in our garden are really flourishing, while others are just dead and need some attention. And that's what quiet times do. That's what placing us before the Lord. It says we need God to be the tender of our garden. He's the vine dresser. We need Him to do work on us. And so when we don't do that kind of work, it becomes problematic. But similarly, if you keep planting, if you keep putting seed down, fertilizing, and then the grass just remains dormant and never grows, then something's not working. We're not learning something that we're supposed to. And so that's what God wants to do. He wants to bring us to places where we're learning. And so it's not just, hey, God, take this away from me. It's getting behind, why are we fearful of Him taking this? Let's say somebody's struggling with lust and they're anxious about it. Well, why do I hold on to my lust? What am I fearful in letting go of my lust? What kind of, and then you start identifying, what kind of problems is the lust causing me? How has it imprisoned me? How would my life be better if I just turn this over to Jesus? Same thing with anxiety. How is my anxiety helping me? How would my life be better if I turn this over? And so you go through this process. And I think what happens a lot of times, we start finding the core issues that we're struggling with that makes it difficult for us just to really abide in Jesus.
What do you say, John Huang?
That was really good, Bobby. And the only thing I would add is, for me, when I think about that passage, especially if you look at it just in its context, Peter is speaking to a group of Christians that are in very real persecution. They are in very real suffering. And so there were a lot of pressures that they were feeling. And Peter exhorts them to cast all their cares. Think about your anxieties, like Bobby mentioned, your worries, the thing that caused you to be afraid, all those things onto the Lord, because someone's going to have to carry the weight of all of those anxieties and worries and fears. And the question is are we going to trust God enough to believe that He's got strong enough shoulders and a broad enough shoulder that we can throw on Him all of those things that without His help and without His care would normally cripple us, debilitate us, derail us? Because whenever we're trying to hold all of those anxieties and fears and the weight, the burdens, our cares on ourselves, you know how crushing that is. And so I love the fact that God is portrayed here as the one who cares for us. Earlier Peter talks about how He is the chief shepherd, right? And so the shepherd cares for his flock, and it's out of that image that Peter says that we throw all of our burdens onto Him because He wants to carry the load of our burdens. And it just makes us wonder, like, what could our lives look like if we actually trusted more and worried less? What could our lives look like if we trusted more and we allowed the Lord to carry our anxiety? So going back to the question about how that ties in prayer, for me, it's one of the same. Like, for me, whenever I'm beginning to feel crushed, that's when I drop to my knees and I bring all those things to God in prayer. In fact, in Luke chapter 18, Jesus invited us to that. He told this parable, and it says, and He told him this parable on the need for them to pray always and not give up. So as long as those things are potentially crushing your life, God invites you to say, listen, instead of you carrying the burden and being crushed, remember, I'm the chief shepherd. Why don't you just throw that on me? Because I'm sovereign, I'm good, and I care for you, and I am strong enough to carry all of your heavy load. And that's the comfort that we have as believers.
Lee, does this help you?
It does, but I think more of my question was like, I'm praying for some my cousin and my mother who have some health issues, and so I was praying for their health to be restored. So my thing was, and I guess I didn't quite present it the way I was thinking of it to be answered, but do I continue to pray for them on a daily basis? It doesn't seem like I'm casting my worries upon the Lord if I'm praying and worrying about their health on a daily basis.
John?
Well, Jesus invited us. He said, ask, keep on asking. Knock, keep on knocking. Seek, keep on seeking. And like the passage I just read here in Luke 18, that we pray always and not give up. I think that it's not because we're trying to manipulate God or we're trying to, twist God's arm or push Him into a corner with our prayers and just shove Him into a position that says, listen, out of my persistence, I'm just making you feel so guilty about yourself that you're going to have to be obligated to answer my prayer. No, I think that it's in the process where when you read the parables of Jesus on the subject of prayer, Jesus is constantly speaking about the goodness of the Father over even the evil fathers in the world, that in persistence, God hears and He responds, but He's going to do it His way. And the more we pray, the persistence in prayer, we find that it's more than just trying to see God work in our way. It's more about God aligning our will up with His, that we start desiring things done His way. And that's why so often you see people that have been persisting in prayer. It's not just that they see a change in their circumstances. More importantly, they begin to see a change in their character. They begin to see a change in their desires. That they begin to see how at the end, it's like, I want God's glory to reign supreme here. And what is that going to look like in the lives of the people that I'm praying for? Can God heal? Absolutely. But how God wants to work, that's something that is His prerogative. And so often in prayer, God is aligning up our will with His through the process of persistent prayer.
Lee, thank you for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective, and thanks for listening to KSDW, San Diego's Worship and the Word station. 888-564-6173 is our number. And now let's talk to Norma, who's watching us on YouTube in Bellflower, California. Let's wave to Norma. Hi there, Norma. Welcome to the program. How can we help you?
Hello, everyone. Blessings to everyone. Thank you for taking my call. The reason that I'm calling is because I'm trying to get more of an understanding. So my understanding now is that we are made of three parts, which is body, soul, and spirit. And when a person passes away, the spirit returns to the Lord. Their soul goes where it's going to go, and the body is the one that pretty much disintegrates and the process of dying. But my question is, when a person donates their organs, I've been watching series and just reading on just scientific things about it. And what I'm being taught about that is that there's still an essence of life of that person passed away in those organs. So my question is, what is the truth for us as believers, and is a part of that person that donated their organs being part of the other person that's getting the organs?
Okay. Bobby Conway, what do you say about organ donation?
Great question, Norma. I would prefer to look at the composition of who we are as soul and body. And we are material and immaterial. So not three parts, but just material. We're body, and we're immaterial. And the immaterial aspect of us, the soul, if you think of this, to use the illustration that I often share of J.P. Moreland, the great Christian philosopher, consider a dresser that has drawers. And think of the dresser in terms of your soul. But then the drawers would be things like your spirit, which communicates with God, your emotions, with what you feel, your will, you make decisions with, your reason, what you think with. And so therefore, that would be a way of seeing this. On an immaterial level, you have a soul, and within the soul is the spirit. The Bible uses other language as well. It's funny because we'll talk about body, soul, and spirit, but the Bible talks about the fact loving God with all of our heart. So why don't we talk about body, soul, spirit, and heart? And the Bible uses all kinds of other types of language, right? Like this. And so it's immaterial language that's a part of our soul, and our heart would then be a part of, that, emotional aspect of us, right? The center of our being. You could even say, hey, it's part of our willing to love him. It just depends on what context you're in. Now, having said that, the body, the material aspect of ourselves, when we die, you're correct. The body goes into the ground. And then if you were an organ donor, then if somebody else gets that heart, then what happens? Does that heart become an essential part of them? Well, your body really is special. It is sacred. It's not to be considered as something that can just be discarded. But what the Lord will do is, in the resurrection, he will know how to give that person who had that other person's heart, he'll know how to give that person everything back, bodily speaking, that's needed for the glorified body. He's going to be able to separate all that out. And so just because we help somebody with a body part, that's not going to, not to be, childish here, but it's not going to be hard for him to separate that out. One of the dangers is, as we talked on the show, I think yesterday, I mentioned that the ancient Greeks, they had a view of the body that for some, Here comes the break.
Here comes the break. All right. So Bobby Conway has left us on a cliffhanger. We will have to get back to the question when we return here on Pastor's Perspective. Phone lines are open till 4 p.m. Pacific time on this Wednesday, the 8th of November. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. 888-564-6173. Bobby Conway and John Huang answering your questions at 888-564-6173. Call us up. Hey, we're back on Pastor's Perspective. Thanks so much for listening today. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. Thanks for watching as well. We're on Facebook and YouTube, streaming live until 4 p.m. Pacific time. My name is Brian Perez. We've got Bobby Conway and John Huang here to answer your questions. We got a call from Norma, who's watching us in Bellflower, California on YouTube. And we do thank you for that call, Norma. Bobby was in the middle of answering your question when the music started, so we had to take our break. But take it away, Bobby Conway, on this discussion about organ donation.
Yeah, so as I was saying, God will be able to, regather our bodies for his purpose in eternity. But valuing the body is important. As we talked about yesterday, a theology of the body is really important. And in today's culture, the body is distinguished from the person. And this is problematic. When you distinguish the body from the person, and you basically end up thinking you could do whatever you want with your body. It doesn't matter. My body, for some people, it just becomes a burden that you try to discipline into obedience through asceticism. And then for others, it can be ultra hedonism, party it up. I can do what my body as I please because my body's not my essential self. My body's not going with me into eternity. So like you take, some belief systems that, like Scientology or Hinduism. In Hinduism, you'll have, and Scientology, you can come into all kinds of different bodies through reincarnation. It's the soul that really matters. But the problem is what we do with our body impacts our soul. And if we don't realize that there's a body-soul connection, then we might make decisions for our body that are hindering our soul. And so then how it plays out, if you distinguish person from body, then that's what happens with the pro-life and pro-choice argument. Well, yes, it's a body, but it's not a person until it has an ability to have, rational thought and to make decisions for itself and so on and so forth. Well, you can see how this plays out if you reason in that way. If you reason in that way, then the baby can be aborted because it's just a glob of matter. It doesn't really matter because it's not a person yet. Or if somebody is elderly, you have euthanasia, that you're distinguishing between, the body and personhood. Or you can take all kinds of things as it relates to, our gender. You can have 100 different pronouns that are out there because, your body is not a part of your essential self. What your essential self is what you feel. And you got to be authentic to your feelings and live out your feelings. And that becomes the ultimate. And so that is what happens to us in a culture. And it's a real mess. It's a shame to see what's happening in today's culture. I mean, think about our values, how much they've shifted. We've went from having family values. And if you talk about family values, that's problematic. We've went from believing in marriage in a home between a man and a woman. Now, if you believe that, you're bigoted. We went from believing in a gender binary. And now, if you don't believe in that, well, there's something wrong with you. Even the early church, you can look and see that the early church, we have writings that were out that abortion was wrong, right? And so now, if a woman wants to have the baby and she calls it her baby, then great. But if she deems that it's not going to be her baby, then it's not a baby. It's just a glob of tissue that can be discarded with. And so basically, it's what the woman decides with her body about the body growing inside of her. And so all this kind of ethical stuff is in our culture. And now today, we value things like pornography, sexuality, expressing your true self. And we're just deconstructing all these other things that used to hold us intact.
Now, I have a question because this comes up often. A question that we get is about cremation. And people will say, well, wait a minute, if I get cremated and the rapture takes place, how is the Lord going to take my body if it's scattered all over the ocean or up in the mountains or wherever? So this is a similar question here that Norma had where, it's organ donation. So your heart or your kidney or something might be in somebody else's body. So it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think this is where we go back to Genesis chapter 1, and we read those opening verses. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and if we can believe that, then we shouldn't have any problem with how God is going to bring about that bodily resurrection. It's like the illustration that we've heard growing up about the Christian who dies, and then the body decomposes, and then it mixes with the soil, and then the soil gives birth to the grass, and then the cow comes and eats the grass, and then digests the grass, and then the milk is produced, and someone drinks the milk, and then what happens to the resurrection, right? And then to that question, right. I think Jesus would respond the same way he did to the Sadducees: "You do not understand the resurrection nor the power of God," right? And so. None of these things trip God up. And I think that, for me, recognizing that if God could create the heavens and the earth out of nothing, then I shouldn't have a problem in understanding that God knows how he's going to bring about the resurrection of the body in the future.
For sure. Norma, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. Now let's go to Katie, who's in San Diego. And Katie listens to the program on a podcast. So she's going to listen to today's podcast later and hear herself. Katie, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. So my husband and I are trying to define the line between showing the love of Jesus and having some healthy boundaries with some toxic non-Christian family members. as the first Christian in the family on his side, there's a strong conviction for us to show grace and love and what it looks like to be a Christian and have a level of unconditional love. And yet, at the same time, there are generational cycles that need to be broken and boundaries that need to be put in place. Recently, our trust was broken when his mother kept some unhealthy decisions secret, and it was a very dangerous moment where we realized that love and boundary conversation really needed to happen. And so we do want to foster continued relationships there, but we also need to keep 3 small children safe. And so we would love your thoughts on love and boundaries. What boundaries would you put in place if it was your family, and how do you communicate those while still showing the love of Christ?
Yeah, Bobby, we'll start with you on this one. What do you say to Katie?
Boundaries can be challenging because it establishes borders and rules for the relationship, right? My wife has often said, you teach people how to treat you. And sometimes boundaries go up because they're needed. And it can feel unfortunate when we have to come to that kind of a place. You'd like to think that there is no need for that. Every relationship, though, has unspoken boundaries, even in my marriage, right? Like if there's a boundary that I can't come home and if I'm mad, slug my wife. So that's an unspoken boundary. So we're all operating with boundaries in our relationship, whether they're spoken or unspoken, but sometimes you have to speak the boundaries out because the unspoken boundaries are being crossed. And so therefore you have to define them. When you do define them, then that can create relational tension because the unspoken values of the relationship according to the other person might look different. And so then it might create some arm wrestling that has to take place, right? And that's really challenging. And so ideally, identify the areas where you're feeling threatened, where you're feeling that the relationship is challenging. And then I would say, hopefully your first approach before laying out boundaries is the conversations of, I'm feeling these types of things. And hopefully without even having to talk in terms of boundaries, you can just create some relational structure that keeps the relationship healthier. If that doesn't take place, then you can say, look, we've talked about this before, and this has continued to be violated. This is going to have to happen. But then boundaries come with attached consequences. And the attached consequences are what happens when the boundaries are violated. I would say you can read John Townsend and Henry Cloud for more, as they are the experts in this area as it relates to boundaries.
John Huang, what do you say about boundaries?
I honestly, I can't add to what Bobby just shared. I was just listening to you, Bobby, and I'm thinking, man, in a very concise way, I think that you did such a great job just giving good advice on that question. So well done.
Again, that book is called Boundaries, When to Say Yes, How to Say No, to Take Control of Your Life. It's by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Again, it's called Boundaries. Katie, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. Let's go to Jackie, listening in Anaheim, California. Welcome to the program, Jackie. You're on with Bobby Conway and John Huang.
Thank you so much for taking my call. My question is in regards to how do you explain the importance of marriage to a non-believer or someone who believes in God but isn't living their faith out? So the context of this question comes from a conversation I had with someone who was raised in the church, unfortunately isn't living the lifestyle of a Christian, so they are sleeping with their boyfriend, but they're committed. They've been together for, I think, 3 or 4 years, and now they're saying, like, oh, why do we need to sign a piece of paper in order to stay committed to each other if we choose to, if we're choosing to do that anyways. So I kind of just want to get your perspective on how to approach that conversation.
Okay, John, what would you say to Jackie?
Well, I'm glad that you clarified because on the screen it was talking about to a non-believer, and the assumption is someone that basically has no interest in God or Christianity. And so, I mean, obviously, a conversation with a person like that is going to be a bit different, because there are people that they have some kind of Christian upbringing, like the one that you're describing, that they have a basis of understanding what the Bible teaches. I think the challenge, though, today, and this goes with what Bobby had just talked about a few minutes earlier, is that we're living in a time, in a culture where it seems like these relational understandings are being deconstructed, and so, you know, what used to be looked down as being bad or immoral or taboo within society, today it's being celebrated and praised within culture. And so, you know, when you look at how people are thinking about marriage, and the divorce rate increasing, and people, walking into marriage without the expectation that this is something that's going to last. It's almost like people are walking into it with the expectation that divorce is just going to be right around the corner. It just makes things hard. And so, you know, I've been having, to think through stuff with people that for them, it's like all they've ever seen growing up at home was just everything bad, everything wrong about, in their mind, what they would label as marriage, that it all ended up in divorce. So their whole point is, then what is the point? Why would we want to even subject ourselves into that? And so then that just becomes the new cultural norm for them. And the problem, however, is one big issue for someone who claims to have a Christian upbringing is, number one, it goes against God's will, God's plan for marriage. Since the book of Genesis, we see that God's plan was one man, one woman in a covenant relationship, not only vertically with God, but with each other. And, you know, when the question comes up, well, it's only a piece of paper. Well, that piece of paper means something. Right? Like, could you imagine, like, if, as an immigrant coming into the United States and someone says, hey, are you going to apply for your citizenship? And because there's a whole world that is going to open up when you're legal in the country. Oh man, it's just a piece of paper, right? No, that little piece of paper that I have as someone that was born in South Korea and moved to the United States, that piece of paper means something. Or when I graduated from seminary, and sure, I could have just looked at my education and say, well, I paid lots of money into it and whatever, but I got a piece of paper at the end saying you graduated, and that piece of paper means something. And man, if something like graduation means something, how much more the life issues of a covenant relationship means something. Because even in speaking about divorce, Jesus talks about a certificate of divorce, which means that there is a process for a couple that wants to divorce. They've got to go through something, and there's a certificate that's issued saying that marriage is now officially over, which means that there is something legally binding in that marriage union. But for God, it's more than just the legal. It is a covenant between God and between each other. I mean, that's the whole purpose of these vows. And so, like, when you've got two people just living together, there are parameters, safety parameters that are missing. One is, like I said, that covenant relationship, that serves as parameters, borders, boundaries for trust, for safety, for protection, for provision. It's the whole till death do us part. I mean, that is something that you do not get from a covenant-less, vow-less relationship. And that means that the field is wide open. So if adultery comes in, or if a person just says, you know what, I'm just tired in this, I really don't feel like I love you anymore. I mean, the field is wide open. There are no parameters, and they leave. And there are emotional and destructive things that happen on an emotional level and things like that. So I mean, this is a conversation, obviously, we can just keep going on and on about. But at the end of the day, when it talks about divorce, Jesus said that Moses issued that certificate of divorce because of the hardness of your heart. And I really believe that also applies to people, that when they clearly know what God is saying about the marriage union, I think that one of the biggest challenges of why people are pushing back against it, it's not because of lack of information in Scripture. It's because of the hardness of heart. And people just want their self-ruled, self-government. They want life their way. And the problem is when you introduce Jesus as a king into your life and Jesus has a kingly order, then unless you're willing to follow that, then there's going to be mutiny. People are just going to say, no, I don't want Jesus to be my king. I want to be my own king. And that means I want to establish a kingdom my way, have my freedoms, have my agendas. And that's how someone who says they are a Christian or have grown up in a church is able to move in that direction. And it's just an unhealthy place to be.
Bobby?
Yeah, I don't have anything to say except that's just so spot on, John. That's what I have to say. So that was a contradiction. I don't have anything to say, and then I proceeded to say something. That was messed up, right? But that was great, John. I mean, and honestly, I feel like that kind of grit that John you just spoke, we just need to shoot people straight a little bit more. The church has been very soft. The church has been too concerned about ruffling feathers. And I hate it. I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. I want to be liked by people. I can fall into people pleasing. Man, I hate that thought. On Sundays, I'm standing up at times going, I realize the way I'm talking right now cuts so against the grain of our culture. And I feel so naked and vulnerable and exposed, but this is my calling. And I have to be honest with you. And I just feel like we have spoon-fed a generation of Christians and candy-coated their Christianity for them. And unfortunately, everybody sees themselves, as John said, their own authority, and that's just not good. We need to, we're not our own. In fact, our bodies are not our own. Right. 1 Corinthians 6 says, your body is not your own. You are the temple of the Lord. And it uses the Greek word nous, referring to the Holy of Holies. The Spirit of God indwells in our bodies. And we can realize that if Paul was willing to obey the laws of the land under Nero, then how much more even should we follow protocol for getting a certificate? And how much more should we proudly want to stand up before people and say, this is before Jesus, this is what this is about, and walk with him. So I guess I did have something to say, but really, you just fired me up, John, in a good way.
Yes, thank you for sharing, Bobby Conway. Jackie, thank you for calling us today, Bobby, on Pastor's Perspective. Now we're going to go to Allie, who is listening to the program on our flagship radio station, K-Wave 107.9 in El Monte. Allie, how does 107.9 come in El Monte?
Hi, how are you guys? Thank you so much for taking my call.
You bet. Does the signal come in okay there?
Yes. Can you guys hear me? I hope you guys can.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, can you hear the radio station okay in El Monte?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Awesome. Because we're also on AM 1110. So I just wanted to throw in a little commercial that we're on AM 1110 and FM 107.9 in Southern California. So if 107.9 gets spotty or staticky, you can switch over to AM 1110. So how can we help you today, Allie?
Yes, so I'm married, and my husband is basically atheist. He respects the fact that I'm Christian, and when he met me, I was always clear about my faith. So it's been a year since I married him, and he has never questioned me or said anything when I pray at night. So my question is, how do I keep a healthy relationship with my husband in the future? And what is your advice? I, in my faith, believe and pray that God will open up his mind and his eyes without me pushing religion on him. But I do want to make sure, what to do if things were to get a little bit tough.
Now, Allie, was he always an atheist when you guys were dating, or was he a Christian at some point?
So he's basically Catholic, but his family grew up, I guess, how they grew up with that religion. Then he went to school, and he's a math teacher, and I feel like once he started getting into school, that kind of got into his head. That's what I think. And then he just kind of concluded that if you can't see it, he won't believe it, or he has an explanation for everything.
Interesting. Bobby Conway, what would you say to Allie? First, some advice on how to stick with this relationship, and also maybe if her husband happens to be listening to this episode.
Okay. One quick question, because I want to get at the there's lots of types of atheists. There's atheists that don't believe in objective morality, like Friedrich Nietzsche. There's atheists that believe in objective morality, like Sam Harris or Eric Willingberg. There's atheists that are nihilists, like Albert Camus. There's atheists that are existentialists, like Jean-Paul Sartre. So what kind of atheist is your husband? Does he believe in values? Does he believe in an ethic that looks similar to the Judeo-Christian ethic?
Yeah, he's more of a like Einstein kind of atheist, where he feels like science explains it all. So that's it. Like, because if science explains it, that's the only way. Because it's the only one. If you can't see it, you can't believe it. There has to be an explanation for everything.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. I mean, because even if he doesn't believe in objective morality, but he's still living as if there is objective morality, then you have a better chance of having an objectively good relationship. Now, if you're in a situation where, he's believing in scientism, I mean, that's problematic, obviously. Scientism is the belief that science can answer everything. But even, just the whole idea, the statement science can answer everything isn't a scientific statement. So it can't answer the statement that science answers everything. So it's self-refuting. I would say things that hopefully you could agree on is a set of family values. Okay, you're now an atheist. I'm a Christian. What's it going to look like for us to have values of togetherness? Do you value telling the truth? Do you value being loyal to me? Do you value not looking at pornography? I would say you're going to want to you want to hone in on some values that you could agree on together, and then once you kind of have those family values, at least that can be something. As Christians, you have the Bible, and you come together, and that's your value statement. Well, if he doesn't have that, then you want to have something independent of yourselves that you try to put down on paper that can guide your relationship so that you guys can be one. And so you would say something like, our goal in marriage is to be one, to have intimacy. What does that look like? Of the Christian values, this is what a marriage is. Are you willing to go by that? If not, what do I need to prepare myself for? And so you want to know what you got yourself into in this particular situation. And so this is not an easy answer. There's so much more that I could say, especially as it relates to challenge. I think atheism is the weakest worldview and most unintelligible worldview on offer. To believe that nothing took nothing and made something is just absolutely unintelligible. Atheism can't explain consciousness. It can't explain objective morality. It can't explain free will. It's a brainwash system that's come down from academia, and unfortunately it's captured a lot of people. I wish you all the best, and I wish we had more time to chat.
Allie, tell your husband to call us tomorrow. We would love to chat with him. We're going to be here for 2 hours tomorrow between 3 and 5 p.m. Pacific time, so have him call us tomorrow. And everyone else that we couldn't get to today, really, really sorry about that, but we will be here tomorrow from 3 to 5 p.m. Pacific time, and we look forward to talking to you then. For Bobby Conway and John Huang, I'm Brian Perez, and Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.